5 years after the Vothan War, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new normal. Commander Vexlar was now Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Coalition. He stood in the same chamber where the precursor warning had been dismissed years before. The council looked very different now. For one thing, it was significantly larger. 23 new species had joined since the revelation of humanity's true nature, not because they feared conquest, but because they recognized the coalition now had a protector who could actually protect them. For another thing, humanity sat at the head table. Ambassador Vasquez had been joined by Admiral Blake and Governor Nathan Pierce. Pierce had become a symbol for human resilience. Together they formed humanity's permanent presence on the High Council. Vexlar announced good news to the Assembly. The reports from the former Vothan Empire were encouraging. Reconstruction was ahead of schedule. Their planets were stable. Their economy was recovering. Remarkably, there had been no incidents of violence against human peacekeeping forces. Ambassador Zelquan spoke from his seat. He was one of the few original council members still serving. Everyone remembered what happened when they pushed too far. That was the entire point, Governor Pierce agreed. Humans did not destroy the Vothan people. They destroyed their capacity to harm others. There was an important difference. Vexlar acknowledged this. 5 years ago, the council would not have understood that difference. They assumed power meant conquest. That military strength automatically led to oppression. Humanity taught them otherwise. Admiral Blake added that humans taught what the precursors already knew. The most dangerous species were not the ones who wanted to fight. They were the ones who could fight but chose not to. Right up until they had no choice left. A new voice spoke from the back of the chamber. Grand Arbiter, if he could speak. Vexlar gestured permission. The speaker was a young Vothan officer named Krelvin. He was one of the few survivors from the Thunder of Empire. He spent 5 years working with human forces in the reconstruction effort. He wanted to share something. His people had been studying human history. Not just military history, but all of it. They found something unusual. He activated a holographic display showing Earth's historical timeline. Humans had been fighting wars for their entire recorded history. Thousands upon thousands of conflicts. But they noticed a pattern. Every time humans developed a new weapon, there was a period of devastating warfare. Crossbows and gunpowder and nuclear fission, each led to terrible wars followed by long periods of peace. Vasquez spoke quietly. Humans scared themselves. Every time they invented a new way to kill each other, they eventually realized how horrible it was. Then they pulled back. They learned and adapted. They created rules of war and international laws and treaties. Krelvin continued his explanation. But humans never forgot how to use the weapons. They just chose not to. Coalition species all evolved with external threats, predators and harsh environments and competing species. Humanity's only real threat was other humans. They spent 10,000 years fighting themselves and learning from every conflict. That was why the precursors were terrified. They realized humans did not have a warrior caste because every human was taught basic warfare. Humans did not have a concept of total war because they had been holding back against each other for millennia. What they did to the Vothan Empire was them being restrained. Admiral Blake confirmed this, dismantling Vothan military in 6 hours. That was restraint. The chamber fell completely silent. Vexlar let the words hang in the air before speaking. Which brought them to the real question. What happened now? Humanity revealed its true strength. Every species in the galaxy knew what they were capable of. How did everyone move forward? Vasquez stood to address this, the same way humans always planned to. They would trade and negotiate and explore. They would make friends. The only thing that changed was now everyone knew not to mistake human preference for peace as inability to fight. Zelquan asked what would happen if another species decided to test them. Blake answered simply. Then humans would remind them what happened to the Vothan. Once was enough to make the point. Twice would be tragic. 3 times would be unnecessary. Vexlar spoke with certainty. No one would test humanity again. The precursor warning had been distributed to every world in coalition space and beyond. Every species knew. Every government understood. Humanity was dangerous when threatened. Vasquez added the rest of the message. And peaceful when left alone. That was the message they wanted to spread. Humans were not conquerors. They were not expansionists. They were just a species that learned the hard way what violence costs. They were willing to pay that cost one more time if necessary, but they would really rather not. Governor Pierce spoke for the first time in the session. 3,000 people died on Kepler 442b. 3,000 lives lost because the Vothan thought humans were weak. He visited that memorial every year. He read the names. He remembered the faces. He thought about what the precursors tried to warn everyone about. He looked around the chamber at assembled species. The precursors said humans were kind until they could not afford to be. That was still true. Humanity would be friends and allies and trading partners and neighbors, but never again mistake their kindness for weakness. Because the moment anyone did that, the moment anyone forced them to choose between being kind and being survivors, they would always choose to survive. Vexlar acknowledged humans were very good at surviving. Pierce replied they had a lot of practice. The council session ended with a unanimous vote. Humanity became a permanent security member with veto power over any military actions. It was a level of authority no species ever held before, but no one objected anymore. That night, Vexlar found himself back at the precursor vault where everything started. The chamber had been converted into a museum. The warning was displayed for everyone to see. He read the ancient text again, understanding it now in ways he never had before. They were peaceful by choice, not by nature. What appeared as weakness was restraint. They did not have a warrior caste because every human was a warrior. Leave them alone, a voice spoke behind him. They should have listened. Vexlar turned to find Ambassador Vasquez standing in the entrance. She walked to stand beside him. The precursors encountered humans 60,000 years ago during the Stone Age. They used temporal technology to see humanity's future. They saw what humans would become. It scared them so badly they fled to the edge of the galaxy. Yet humans joined the coalition anyway. Knowing what they were, knowing what might happen, Vexlar asked why. Because humans wanted to be more than what they were. They wanted to prove they could evolve beyond violence, that they could be peaceful not just by necessity but by choice. The precursors were right to fear them. But they were wrong about one thing. Vexlar asked what? The precursors thought human capacity for violence was their defining characteristic. But it was not. Their defining characteristic was ability to learn, to change, to become better. Yes, they were dangerous and terrifying when pushed, but they were also capable of incredible kindness and cooperation and restraint. She looked at the warning one more time. The Vothan learned what happened when you made humans stop being peaceful. Now everyone knew. But she hoped the galaxy also learned something else. Humans genuinely preferred peace. They were happier as traders than warriors. They would rather negotiate than fight. The precursors warned about what humans could do. Vasquez hoped the galaxy also learned what humans chose to do when given the option. Build and create and cooperate and explore and make friends. The human fleet that destroyed Vothan military was built over 200 years. Humans could have done amazing things with those resources if they had not needed to prepare for the worst. They could have colonized 50 systems. They could have built research stations and terraformed planets and created wonders. That was what they wanted to do now. Now that everyone knew not to push them, maybe they could finally stop preparing for war and start building the future they actually wanted. The precursors warned about what humans were when threatened. Humans were going to show what they were when left in peace. Every human alive today descended from survivors, warriors, predators who learned to cooperate just long enough to kill bigger predators. Councillor Threnvix demanded to know why humans joined the coalition at all. If they were so dangerous, why not just conquer everyone? Vasquez answered simply, because humans grew up. They learned. They evolved. They discovered that cooperation was more profitable than conquest. Peace was more sustainable than war. Being feared was much less useful than being underestimated. Humans joined the coalition because they wanted to be part of something better than what they were. Vexlar spoke carefully. But when pushed, Vasquez finished his thought. When pushed, humans remember what they are. The Vothan killed 3,000 human civilians, 3,000 people including children in a deliberate attack on a peaceful colony. They did not destroy a military target. They did not eliminate a threat. They murdered people to make a point. Her voice turned cold. Humans were going to make a point back. The Vothan Empire had 17 core worlds and 42 colonies. As of 2 hours ago, human forces entered Vothan space. They were not targeting civilians. They were not destroying cities. They were systematically dismantling every military installation, every government facility, every weapon that Warlord Shentar used to build his empire. Kothnax was aghast. Humans were invading an entire empire? Vasquez corrected him. They were ending one. By the time they finished, the Vothan would have no capacity to threaten anyone ever again. They would still have their worlds. Their people would still live. But their military would exist only in history books. Kothnak started to say the Coalition could not allow this. Vasquez cut him off flatly. The Coalition could not stop them. That was the point everyone needed to understand. Humans spent 200 years watching the galaxy, learning Coalition tactics, studying everyone's technology, building their own forces. They were not asking for permission. They were informing the Council of what was going to happen. The chamber erupted in protest. Vasquez spoke over them. Here was what humanity offered. They would continue being Coalition members. They would continue to trade. They would continue to negotiate. But they would never allow another Kepler 442b. Any species that attacked human civilians would face the same fate as the Vothan. Any species that harbored attackers would face consequences. Any species that even contemplated attacking humans would have exactly one chance to reconsider. Selquan accused them of threatening the entire galaxy. Vasquez disagreed. They were warning the entire galaxy. There was a difference. Humans did not want war. They never wanted war. They came to space looking for friends and trading partners. For 200 years, they were exactly what everyone thought. Peaceful merchants and diplomats. But the Vothan forgot something the precursors learned 60,000 years ago. Humans were peaceful by choice, not by nature. They chose peace because they understood the alternative better than anyone. They had been killing each other for thousands of years. They refined warfare into an art form. They knew exactly how much damage they could do when they stopped holding back. Here was humanity's new policy. Leave them alone and you had nothing to fear. Trade with them and prosper. Negotiate with them and find common ground. But threaten them or attack them or harm their people. Then they would show the galaxy what humanity looked like when they stopped pretending to be harmless. She sat down. Silence filled the chamber completely. Commander Vexlar stood after a long moment. He formally requested that the precursor warning be unsealed and distributed to all Coalition members. Everyone needed to understand what the precursors knew. What they tried to warn about. Kothnax agreed quietly. His crystalline form had lost its color and turned dull gray. Let it never be said they ignored a warning twice. The council session ended. As representatives filed out, most avoided looking at Ambassador Vasquez. But Vexler approached her directly. He asked how long. How long would the war against the Vothan last? Vasquez told him it was already over. The Vothan surrendered their military command structure 40 minutes ago. Humans were just cleaning up now. Vexlar processed this information. In 6 hours, humans destroyed an empire that took 3,000 years to build. Vasquez confirmed this. Vexlar said the precursors were right to run. Vasquez smiled sadly. They were right to be afraid. But they were wrong about one thing. Vexlar asked what that was. The precursors thought human capacity for violence was their defining characteristic. But it was not. The real defining characteristic was the ability to learn, to change, to become better. Yes, humans were dangerous. Yes, they could be terrifying when pushed, but they were also capable of incredible kindness and cooperation and restraint. She looked at a display screen showing Vothan military assets being systematically dismantled. The Vothan learned what happened when you made humans stop being peaceful. Now everyone knew. But here was what she hoped the galaxy also learned. Humans genuinely preferred peace. They were happier as traders than warriors. They would rather negotiate than fight. The precursors warned about what humans could do. Vasquez hoped the galaxy also learned what humans chose to do when given the option. Vexlar asked what that was. Build, create, cooperate, explore, make friends. The human fleet that destroyed Vothan military power. Those ships were built over 200 years. Did anyone know what humans could have done with those resources if they had not needed to prepare for the worst? They could have colonized 50 systems instead of 17. They could have built research stations. They could have terraformed planets. They could have created wonders. Vasquez smiled genuinely now. That was what humans wanted to do now. Now that everyone knew not to push them, maybe they could finally stop preparing for war. Maybe they could start building the future they actually wanted. The precursors warned about what humans were when threatened. Humans were going to show the galaxy what they were when left in peace. She turned to leave, then paused. Besides, they had a new project starting next month. Humans and Krethians working together to establish a joint colony on the rim. Vexlar's species and hers building something together, instead of worrying about fighting each other. That was the future she wanted. The future the precursors never got to see. Vexlar asked what would happen if someone threatened that future. Vasquez's expression hardened slightly. Then they would remind everyone what happened to the Vothan. Once was enough to make the point, but if they had to make it again, they would. Every single time. She left the chamber. Vexlar stood alone before display screens showing the systematic end of Vothan military power. He understood now why the precursors were so desperate to make their message survive. They tried to warn the galaxy about humanity. The galaxy dismissed the warning and paid the ultimate price. But in paying that price, they learned something the precursors never learned. Humanity was dangerous and terrifying and capable of devastating violence, absolutely, but they were also capable of mercy, of restraint, of peace, as long as you did not make them choose otherwise. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. At the center sat a vessel that dwarfed everything else in the system. A dreadnought 3 times larger than the Thunder of Empire. A transmission came through on all frequencies. The voice was human and sounded calm and professional. Admiral Christopher Blake identified himself as commander of the United Earth Defense Force. He addressed all Vothan vessels directly. They had committed an act of war against a human colony. They murdered 3,000 civilians without provocation. They would stand down immediately and prepare to face justice. Shentar forced himself to speak. His voice carried false confidence. He told Admiral Blake that the posturing was impressive, but the Vothan still had numerical advantage. They had 15 dreadnoughts. Blake corrected him coldly. They had 15 dreadnoughts. Now they had 15 targets. The human fleet moved as one unit. Years later, military analysts across the galaxy would study the Battle of Kepler 442b. They would examine every second of sensor data. They would analyze every tactical decision and every weapon signature. They would write lengthy papers and give lectures about what humanity revealed that day. But in the actual moment, only one word described what happened: slaughter. The human ships did not engage in traditional fleet tactics. They did not form defensive lines. They did not exchange long-range fire. Instead, they moved through the Vothan formation like predators hunting prey. Their weapons were unlike anything in the Coalition database. Particle beams carved through shields as if they were not there. Missiles subdivided mid-flight into dozens of independently targeting warheads. Railguns fired projectiles at speeds approaching the speed of light. The human pilots displayed a level of aggression that shocked even veteran warriors from brutal species. The Thunder of Empire lasted exactly 7 minutes. Shentar spent those minutes screaming orders. He tried desperately to organize some kind of defense. Nothing worked. His final transmission broadcast on all channels. He said they would not stop. They were not taking prisoners. His voice cut off abruptly. Then the Thunder of Empire ceased to exist. Multiple simultaneous impacts tore it apart completely. 14 minutes after the battle began, it was over. 15 Vothan dreadnoughts destroyed. 40 cruisers reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Support vessels were either obliterated or disabled beyond repair. Human casualties totaled 0. Damage to human vessels registered as minimal. Admiral Blake's voice came over the open channel once more. He addressed all surviving Vothan personnel. They were now prisoners of war under the Geneva Convention. They should surrender their vessels and they would be treated fairly. Resistance meant destruction. They had 2 minutes to decide. Every surviving Vothan vessel surrendered within 30 seconds. On the planet's surface, Governor Nathan Pierce watched the orbital battle from his shelter. When it ended, the human fleet established orbit. Relief forces began landing immediately. Nathan opened a channel to the flagship. He thanked Admiral Blake for the rescue, but he had to ask where all these ships came from. He thought the entire human fleet was 300 vessels. There was a long pause before Blake responded. The Admiral explained carefully. The 300 ships they showed the Coalition were the diplomatic fleet. The ships Nathan was looking at were the defense force. They maintained them in deep space far from prying eyes since before first contact. Nathan asked why they would do that. Blake's answer was revealing. Humans learned a long time ago back on Earth. The best way to avoid war is making people think you are weak. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you pose no threat, right up until the moment they push too far. Nathan asked what happens then. Blake's voice hardened noticeably. Then you remind them what humans are really capable of when you take away their choice to be peaceful. Nathan looked at the ruins of New Hope still smoldering on the horizon. He asked what happens now. Blake answered with cold determination. Now the Vothan Empire would learn what it cost to make humanity stop being peaceful. Humans were not the same species anymore after this. The galaxy wanted to see what they were really made of. They were about to find out. The channel closed. Around the planet, the human fleet began forming into assault groups. The Battle of Kepler 442b was over. The war was just beginning. The Galactic Coalition High Council convened an emergency session 6 hours after the battle. Grand Arbiter Kothnak stood at the chamber center. His crystalline form flickered with agitation. Representatives from 300 species watched in various states of shock and fear and disbelief. Kothnax called for order. His voice reverberated through the space. They had to maintain order. But there was no order to be found. The chamber erupted in chaos. Ambassador Zelquan paced frantically. His bioluminescence strobed in distress. 147 capital ships. Humans claimed to have 300 total vessels. Those were supposedly merchant conversions. Where did they hide an entire battle fleet? Commander Vexler answered quietly. In deep space. They had been building it since before first contact. 200 years of construction hidden in the outer reaches. The Coalition never looked there because they assumed humans were too primitive to exploit those regions. Counselor Threnvik spoke angrily. Her 7 heads moved in agitation. 200 years of lying. Every treaty negotiation. Every trade agreement. Every discussion about military limitations. All lies. A new voice spoke from the observation section. Human Ambassador Patricia Vasquez had been sitting silently until now. She stood despite being from one of the smaller species present. Her presence commanded attention. She corrected them firmly. Not lies, careful omissions. She explained that no one ever asked about full human military capacity. They asked about fleet deployments within Coalition space. Humans answered honestly. Everyone else made assumptions. Kothnax's crystalline form pulsed red. He accused them of deception. They violated the spirit of every agreement. Vasquez interrupted him. Humans protected themselves. They knew this moment would eventually come. Someone would test them. Someone would decide humanity looked weak enough to push around. They needed to be ready. Vexlar spoke up. The precursor warning. Humans knew about it. All eyes turned to him. Vasquez smiled slightly. Humans had known about the precursors since achieving spaceflight. Earth had its own warning sealed in an ancient vault in the Himalayas. Different words, but the same message. The precursors came to Earth once long ago. They were observers and scientists. They watched humans for a time. Then they left in a hurry. Ambassador Zelquan asked why. Vasquez explained. They saw human history. They saw what humans did to each other while still bound to one planet. They saw the wars and weapons and capacity for violence carried in human genes. It terrified them. She walked to the chamber center. The precursors left a message. They said humans were the most dangerous species they ever encountered. Not because of strength. They met stronger species, not because of intelligence. They met smarter species, but because humans were both and they evolved in constant conflict. Grand Arbiter Kothnax dismissed the precursor warning during his 3rd term on the Galactic Coalition High Council. His crystalline body refracted light into rainbow patterns across the chamber walls as he addressed the assembled members. He called it ancient superstition. The humans had been coalition members for 187 cycles. In all that time, they never once raised a weapon against another species. Counselor Threnvix of the Vothan Empire nodded all 7 of her heads in agreement. She pointed out that the human military was laughably small. 300 ships across 17 systems. The Vothan patrol fleet alone numbered in the thousands. Ambassador Zelquan added his opinion as well. His bioluminescent skin pulsed with confidence. Humans were merchants and diplomats. They talked and traded and compromised. The precursor warning spoke of warriors and fire, but he had seen no evidence of either trait in humans. Only one voice spoke against the dismissal. Commander Vexlar had been promoted to the council after discovering the vault. He stood to address everyone gathered. The precursors did not make mistakes. Their technology surpassed anything the current galaxy possessed. If they issued a warning, then it should be taken seriously. Kothnax interrupted him rudely. The warning was issued 60,000 years ago about Stone Age primitives. Whatever the precursors saw or experienced was irrelevant to the humans everyone knew today. Vexlar pressed his point. What if the precursors saw humanity's future through their temporal technology? Kothnak shut him down firmly. Temporal viewing was legend and speculation. The council made decisions based on observable facts. The fact was that humans were the least militaristic species in the entire coalition. The precursor warning would be classified as a historical curiosity and archived. The session was concluded. The vote was unanimous except for Vexlar's single dissent. That decision was made 3 months before the Vothan made their terrible mistake. The human colony on Kepler 442b had existed for 35 years. 8,000 colonists called it home. They grew crops in nitrogen-rich soil. They built cities that gleamed under the orange sun. They lived peacefully under coalition law. Then Warlord Shentar decided the system would make an excellent addition to the Vothan Empire. His logic was simple. They were only humans. They would negotiate and compromise and surrender the planet in exchange for safe passage. They always did exactly that. The Vothan fleet entered the Kepler system with overwhelming force. 15 dreadnoughts led the way. 40 cruisers followed behind. Countless support vessels filled out the formation. Against them, the human colony had 3 patrol ships and a handful of orbital defense platforms. Governor Nathan Pierce received Shentar's ultimatum in his office. His advisory council surrounded him. The message was brutally simple. Evacuate the planet within 48 hours or be removed by force. Nathan asked Commander Lisa Reeves about their options. She was head of the colony defense force. Lisa pulled up the tactical display and gave him the harsh truth. They had 3 ships against 15 capital vessels. The orbital platforms might destroy a few smaller craft before being eliminated. They could not win this fight. Nathan asked if they could evacuate everyone in 48 hours. Lisa shook her head. They would need at least 2 weeks to get everyone off-world safely. Even then, where would they go? No other system could absorb 8,000 refugees quickly. Nathan closed his eyes and thought hard. 35 years of work. An entire generation had been born on this world. Children who never saw Earth. Families who built complete lives here. He made his decision. He told Lisa to open a channel to the Vothan flagship. What followed was 6 hours of intense negotiation. Nathan offered resource sharing. He offered trade agreements. He offered to recognize Vothan sovereignty while maintaining human administration. He offered everything except abandoning the colony completely. Shentar refused every single offer. His final message was cold and absolute. The humans had 48 hours. After that, he would demonstrate what happens to species who defied the Vothan Empire. Nathan sent one final transmission. This one went to Earth instead of the Vothan fleet. He requested immediate military assistance. The colony was under threat of invasion. Negotiation had completely failed. The response came back within an hour. Only 2 words appeared on his screen. Hold position. Those 2 words sent ice through Nathan's veins. 48 hours passed slowly. The colonists refused to evacuate. They had nowhere to go, and this was their home. Shentar made good on his threat. The Vothan dreadnought Thunder of Empire fired a single kinetic bombardment round into the primary settlement. The city of New Hope housed 3,000 people. It ceased to exist in seconds. The orbital strike tore through the atmosphere. The city turned into a crater of molten glass. Nathan watched it happen from the secondary settlement 10 kilometers away. He watched the city where his daughter was born disappear. He stood frozen for a long moment. Then he opened the channel to Shentar again. His voice was quiet and perfectly calm. He told the warlord that he killed 3,000 people. Shentar replied without emotion. He would kill 3,000 more every hour until the evacuation happened. The humans brought this on themselves. They should have accepted his generous offer. Nathan continued speaking in that same calm voice. He wanted Shentar to remember something important. He wanted him to remember that humans tried to negotiate, that they offered everything except their home. He wanted Shentar to remember that he chose this path. Shentar laughed. He asked if that was a threat. Nathan corrected him. It was not a threat, but a fact. The warlord would understand the difference soon enough. The channel closed. Shentar laughed again. The sound resembled grinding metal. Around him, his entire bridge crew joined in the amusement. They thought this was funny. These weak humans making empty threats. They were still laughing when the sensors detected something entering the system. Not one thing, but many things. The laughter stopped immediately. The sensor officer reported with an uncertain voice. She identified the fleet signature as human. Shentar leaned forward in his command throne. He demanded a count. The officer scanned frantically. Her voice trembled. She reported 147 capital ships, 362 support vessels, over 800 fighter craft. Her hands shook over the console. This fleet was larger than the entire Imperial Navy. Silence filled the bridge completely. Shentar's mandibles hung open in pure disbelief. He said it was impossible. Human military assets totaled 300 ships. They had intelligence reports. They knew the complete fleet disposition. The officer insisted the signatures were definitely human. But these ship classes did not match any known human designs. They were bigger and more heavily armed. Some of them read as over 50 years old. Vexlar was observing from Coalition Command. He felt his heart turn to ice. He whispered to himself. They had been lying for 200 years about everything. The vault had been sealed for 3,000 cycles, and Commander Vexlar stood before it with doubt in his mind. His forearms moved across the scanning device while his chitinous plates reflected the harsh excavation lights. Lieutenant Sorval stood beside him working on the translation matrix. Vexlar did not believe in this mission at all. 3 months of digging just to find old stories and legends seemed like a complete waste of time and resources to him. The Krethian officer shook his head and spoke to his lieutenant. He told her this was pointless, and they were chasing myths while humans expanded their territories without anyone stopping them. Sorval tried to argue back. She reminded him that the precursors were the most advanced civilization ever known in the galaxy. If they preserved information this carefully, then it must be important. Vexlar cut her off with a sharp response. He asked if they were so advanced, then why did they disappear completely? He believed this was just archaeological tourism and nothing more. The mention of humans made several workers nearby pause their digging. Throughout the entire Galactic Coalition, humanity had become a hot topic of debate. In less than 2 centuries since first contact, they had claimed 17 systems. They built the largest commercial fleet in known space. They secured trade agreements that made them essential to dozens of species. But here was the strange part. They had never started a war. They never conquered anyone. They never even threatened anyone. This bothered Vexlar more than anything else. Something felt wrong about it. The ancient vault door finally opened with a long hiss of escaping atmosphere. Symbols covered every surface, and they began to glow faintly as dormant power systems came back to life. A data column stood in the center of the chamber. Its crystalline structure pulsed with stored information. Sorval approached it carefully and extended her data probe. Her voice carried concern as she announced she was getting a translation. It was a warning. Vexlar laughed dismissively. Every ancient ruin had a warning. Beware those who enter, or something similar. That was always how these things went. Sorval insisted this was different. Her voice had taken on an edge of real worry. The warning was specific, and it was about humans. Vexlar strode over to her position. His skepticism began to waver slightly. The holographic display activated and showed text in the ancient precursor language. A real-time translation scrolled beneath the alien symbols. The message began with an address to those who would come after the precursors. They had observed humans across the vast emptiness of space. They watched them evolve and struggle and rise. They had seen what humans were capable of when pressed into a corner. The precursors sealed this warning, hoping someone would find it, before making the same mistakes they made. The species from the third planet of the yellow star called themselves human. These humans must never be threatened. They were peaceful by choice and not by nature. The precursors learned this truth too late. Vexlar laughed, but the sound was hollow and uncertain. He called the precursors paranoid ancient fools. Humans were traitors and diplomats. They had never shown any aggression. The display continued, and his words trailed off. What the precursors mistook for weakness was actually restraint. What they interpreted as fear was really patience. What they assumed was limited capability was merely what humans chose to show. When the precursors took human colonies, the humans asked for peace. When they destroyed human ships, the humans offered negotiation. When they killed human young, the humans still sought compromise. The precursors thought they had broken humanity. They were completely wrong. The warning explained that humanity did not have a warrior caste because every single human was a warrior. They did not have a concept of total war because they never needed one. They had only ever fought themselves, and even then they held back. The precursors forced humans to show their true nature. 3 precursor worlds burned before they begged for peace. The humans accepted. They always accepted peace, but they never forgot what happened. This was not a threat but a plea. Leave them alone. Complete silence filled the chamber. Vexlar stared at the translated text. His mandibles worked without making any sound. All around them, the excavation team had stopped working entirely. Every eye focused on the warning. Vexlar finally spoke. He said this was impossible. The precursors disappeared 60,000 years ago. Humans only achieved spaceflight 2 centuries ago. How could this be real? Sorval frantically checked calculations on her datapad. She told the commander that if the precursors encountered humans 60,000 years ago, then humans would have been in their Stone Age. They used primitive tools. They had no technology and no spaceflight whatsoever. Vexlar seized on this point exactly. This had to be either a hoax or a misinterpretation of the data. Sorval hesitated before speaking again. Her eyes were wide. The precursors had temporal observation technology. What if they saw humanity's future? Vexlar activated his communicator immediately. His voice was tight with tension. He identified himself to Coalition Command and reported they had found something the Council needed to see right away. As they prepared to transmit all the data, none of them noticed the final line of the warning. It was written in much smaller text at the bottom of the column. The precursors survived only because they surrendered quickly. For the sake of others, do not test humans. They are kind until they cannot afford to be kind anymore. When that moment comes, you will understand why the precursors fled to the far edge of the galaxy. It was not far enough. The transmission reached Coalition Command within an hour. Within 1 day, it had been reviewed by the entire High Council. Within 1 week, it was officially dismissed as ancient propaganda. After all, the Coalition had been watching humanity for 200 years. They knew exactly what humans were capable of. They had observed them carefully and documented everything. The humans showed no signs of aggression or hidden military power. They were merchants and negotiators. The High Council voted to archive the warning as a historical curiosity. Only Commander Vexlar voted against this decision. He had a bad feeling deep in his core that they were making a terrible mistake, but no one listened to his concerns. The matter was closed and filed away. Life in the galaxy continued as normal. The humans kept trading and negotiating. They smiled and compromised. They seemed harmless and weak. The galaxy believed it understood them completely. They had no idea how wrong they were. The ancient warning sat in the archives gathering digital dust. No one thought about it again, not until it was far too late to matter.